Hello, and welcome to Anime Audio Commentary. Today I'll be commenting on Episode 8 of The Familiar of Zero. If you'd like to watch along, then start watching now. So last we left off, Louise had gone undercover for the princess, and in so doing, she sort of, accidentally stopped the nobleman causing trouble. Now, of course, this isn't the end of the troubles. You know, the princess suspects sedition and other stuff going on that's far more serious than just like a corrupt tax collector. But the upshot of all of this is that Louise and Saito, they didn't necessarily come to an understanding, as evidenced by Louise just now elbowing Saito off the horse, but Louise did earn the right to wear a particularly skimpy garment, and she did so not for the intended purpose of earning money, but instead for Saito. And really, when you put it in those terms, it's kind of giving up the game, saying like, hey, I wore this for you. And, you know, I get why Saito wasn't exactly eager to jump all over her at the sight of that, but, you know, it's not something anyone should really ignore. Now, speaking of people being ignored and all that, it seems as though it's summer vacation. You know, Louise has arrived back at the Tristane Academy of Magic just in time for Kirsch and Tabitha to leave, thereby leaving her with Saito. Now, normally during the opening theme, I would sit quietly with reverence, but today I am obligated to my sponsor. Today's sponsor is none other than myself. You may not know this, but I write light novels, and I've written quite a few. Today, I'm going to tell you about the eccentric detective Yamamoto, in which the intrepid, if drunken detective solves a wide variety of cases with the help of her assistant Satoshi. Ranging from finding missing pets and surveilling cheating spouses to catching a high-end cat burglar and preventing the murder of a local business magnate, no case is too big or too small for Detective Yamamoto. Even when she's forced to work with, and occasionally against, the police, and even when she must contend with her fear of the supernatural, nothing will prevent the eccentric detective from doing what needs to be done to solve the case. If this sounds like something you'd like to read, then by all means, consider purchasing books in the Eccentric Detective Yamamoto series by me, Frederick Fitzgerald, through Amazon. Thank you very much for your time, and enjoy the episode. Now, although this episode's going to be mainly Tabitha-centric, you know, this character who hasn't really received much of the spotlight thus far, it should also be mentioned that the end of the previous episode featured 4K, sequestered in her jail cell and approached by a visitor. And the interesting thing is that this visitor freed her, but it was her reaction to the visitor that provokes the most intrigue, in that, you know, her reaction befits someone seeing a superior in terms of status. So, you know, it seems as though that this all ties into the conspiracy of nobles plotting against the crown. Now, back to Tabitha and Kirsch. They're an interesting pair, because at the outset, you wouldn't assume the two of them to be very good friends, you know. Kirsch is, brash and lascivious, and by her own admission, she's a bit of a troublemaker. Tabitha, by contrast, is, by all appearances, very meek and mild and, well, studious, I guess, given that she's always seemingly reading a book. You know, really, it seems as though there's nothing that the two could possibly have in common, but, nevertheless, they do seem to enjoy one another's company frequently. So back at the academy, Saito is suffering. You know, Louise says, here's some laundry for you to do, and if you're too slow, then you will not receive any food. So I'm wondering, well, I guess wonder no more. You know, the antipathy is obviously because Saito is being, like, mildly polite at anyone, rather than just her. I wondered if maybe she was holding some resentment onto his subdued reaction to that garment, but it seems as though that's not really a factor. Now, of course, despite being given laundry and explicit instructions to hurry up, things will never be quite that simple, because Saito has stumbled into a little lover's quarrel between Guiche and Montmorency. Now, naturally, we do know that Guiche, he's got away with the ladies. He tends to philander just a little bit. And even though Montmorency is the true object of his affection, he can't help but play the field a little bit every now and again, much to her chagrin. So, there's a couple things going on here. Montmorency is at once surprised that Saito's still here, indicating that Louise hasn't left for vacation. But at the same time, she's very clearly plotting something. She's gonna get one over on Guiche, whether he's prepared or not. And as is always the case when you use magic to do things, things are gonna hit the fan. So Saito, rather than actually diligently doing the laundry as one might reasonably expect, he has instead decided to latch onto this old cooking pot, deciding that it might be perfect for a separate application if it's no longer used for cooking. Now, of course, as a Japanese person, I guess, no two ways about it, naturally, he deeply desires, like, a nice warm bath. Something that, given that he's effectively in medieval Europe now, it's gonna be in short supply, Now, I don't think he's explicitly stating it, but, what else could he possibly use a giant cauldron for? Now, back with Tabitha and Kirsch, they've sort of taken a bit of a detour given that, I guess, an entire village in a valley has flooded. Now, we'll probably hear more on that later, but the most important thing right now is that Kirsch is sort of suddenly realizing Tabitha's heritage. The crest of her family estate is that of the royal family of Gallia. Now, as for what real European country Gallia is analogous to, I don't know, probably Belgium or something if I had to guess. I feel like I'd have to look at a map to really determine what's going on here, but it is interesting that in a school full of aristocrats, Tabitha is sort of head and shoulders above the rest. And I guess what's also interesting is that, the servants, they don't call her Tabitha, instead they call her Charlotte. So, there's a bit of intrigue here. There's something going on, and it's, I don't know. It's something that Kirsch isn't privy to, despite being ostensibly Tabitha's closest friend. And, I feel like, as an outsider, if someone's being a little less than forthcoming about the nature of their parentage, there's likely a good reason for it, and it's likely not a good reason, So already, the butler's sort of spilling the beans a little bit that, he meets Kirsch formally and that, he himself says he never would have expected that Lady Charlotte, Tabitha, would bring a friend home, which is already sort of indicative of a couple potential things. On the one hand, home might not be worth bringing a friend to, but on the other hand, it could indicate that she simply doesn't have any friends. And in truth, it might be kind of a mix of the two here, considering that Tabitha's entered the private quarters of someone who she purports to be her mother. Her mother's clearly unwell. Like, even without that sort of shrieking outburst just now, her countenance, her posture, her extreme gauntness, none of that's indicative of a healthy person. So the question is, how much is the butler willing to divulge here? Because, it's gotta be sensitive, right? These are matters of state, essentially. And it seems as though there was a bit of a succession crisis here. Tabitha was the daughter of the king, but the king was killed, and therefore, the line of succession went elsewhere to the king's brother. Oh dear. So it seems as though Tabitha's mother, the former queen, she's clearly not well. And sort of in the same vein as, Asuka's mother from Neon Genesis Evangelion. The idea that she considers the doll to be her daughter rather than, the actual flesh and blood daughter in front of her. Yeah, so things are rather dire indeed for a big succession crisis to break out like this, resulting in murder and all that. And on the one hand, it's just sort of how politics plays out. If you're going to make a play for the throne, your best bet after securing it is to essentially kill off any other rival claimants. It's not a good thing, it simply is. And, I find it interesting that Tabitha was targeted first and foremost, because surely, the only thing you can really do is, eliminate everyone. But it is, I guess, laudable that the queen essentially sacrificed herself for the sake of Tabitha. What good it did them in the end. Because, despite saving Tabitha, it all has led to this present state where, Tabitha goes by the name Tabitha. She has essentially abandoned her life, and she now has to deal with a mother whose mind has been thoroughly broken to the point where she's effectively a shut-in. It's real grim. And I guess more to the point, what can really be done about it? If this usurper still reigns as king, what can you really do? I guess when it comes down to it, the only thing you can do is you can do unto them what they have done to you. Usurp the throne again. But, that's a dangerous thing. If you're gonna go ahead and do it, you have to do it right. You can't falter. And I suppose it's not necessarily a question of whether or not Tabitha has, I suppose, the cold-hearted nature to, see it through correctly. But I guess it's a matter of, I guess in part popular support. The best way to retain one's kingship is by being beloved by the people. To sort of paraphrase Niccolo Machiavelli. I guess in her own way, Tabitha's sort of, walking down that path in a manner of speaking, in the sense that she's cultivating magical strength by questing around, performing heroic feats of magic and all that. So that's something. Earlier we were told that Tabitha essentially has a knighthood, the title of Chevalier. And while that's impressive in its own right, that's far beneath what she deserves for the things she's done. So it's sort of a bitter thing, considering that even now Louise already has the same title for considerably less than Tabitha's done. Now back onto lighter territory, it seems as though Montmorency is scheming. She's brewing up something, and it's decidedly not good, Now speaking of decidedly not good, Saito has seemingly shirked doing laundry altogether and just, situated himself with a nice bath. And it is nice and all, everyone deserves to relax a little bit now and again. But given that he hasn't visibly brought back the clean laundry to Louise, I feel like he's kind of been neglecting it. Now I guess unfortunately for everyone, Saito's not only got the drop on Siesta, he's caused her to, drop her tray, which is, not good. But, I don't recall if we've learned of of Siesta's heritage yet. I don't recall, but I feel like maybe if we haven't learned about it, now's perhaps the best time. Saito's sort of, kind of teaching her about what a bath is, and oh dear, Saito, you've just gone and done it, haven't you? You know, by jokingly offering, you know, some room in the bath for her, she's taken him up on it, which, you know, if this doesn't have immediate consequences, then frankly, I will be surprised, you know. Because on the one hand, Siesta's clearly angling here, you know, she knows what's going on. No one would just get in the bath with a member of the opposite sex without, you know, some other ulterior motive. But at the same time, I feel like this is all going to come to a head here. You know, Saito naturally hasn't done the laundry, and he's been out all day effectively, so Louise is naturally going to come looking for him at the worst possible moment. The only question is whether or not she's going to, you know, beat him senseless in public, or if she's going to, you know, wait a little bit to do that. I feel like the odds are even one way or the other. You know, it's something when Siesta says something like that, where it's like, hey, it's too dark to see anything, but if you act embarrassed, I'm going to be embarrassed. It's like, I don't know, man. I feel like this is cause to be embarrassed, considering that you are, you know, at best acquaintances. So it's interesting that the topic of conversation is turned to Saito's country and, you know, what the whole deal is there. And I guess it's only a natural thing. You know, being a commoner in pre-revolutionary France, I reckon you don't tend to meet too many foreigners, you know? I mean, sure, at a school like this, you do have people from Tristan, and people from Germania, and people from who knows where else. You know, that is all well and true, but they're all aristocrats. You know, you don't meet many commoners from other countries. And so when you have someone truly exotic like Saito, then I guess curiosity is the natural response. Ooh, okay, so I think I know where this is going, you know. Montmorency is planning to slip Guiche some sort of potion. And I think it's fair to say that it's going to be like a love potion or something of that effect, right? Like it's pink for starters, and, you know, the whole conflict she has going on is that, you know, Guiche is two-timing her. Oh dear. So Saito has unwittingly been witnessed by Louise, and interestingly, rather than confront him, she seems, well, kind of heartbroken, in a weird sort of way. Now, enough of that. The real interesting thing is that Siesta gives an account of her great-grandfather that is strikingly similar to how Saito arrived in this world. That, you know, he was allegedly from another world, and that he arrived here by falling from the sky. So, you know, in a weird roundabout way, without coming out and saying it, the idea here is that Siesta is of Japanese heritage. You know, albeit, you know, probably only partially at this point. You know, I guess minimally. You know, if her great-grandfather was Japanese, then she's got to be, at best, you know, 1/8 Japanese. But, I guess it's enough to have sort of an instinctive cultural desire for a nice warm bath. So back with Louise, you know, she's understandably upset about this. If somewhat unaccountably, you know. The question is what she's actually going to do about it, because, I mean, it wouldn't necessarily do to just go and start belting him in public. But at the same time, you know, there is also the matter of discipline and laundry. Jeez. Oh, geesh. He literally fell for the oldest trick in the book, and, well, I guess there's nothing for it. Oh, dear. So Louise, in perhaps a lapse of good manners, has swiped Guiche's drink and downed it immediately. Which, you know, that might be bad enough, but that was a laced drink. So, oh dear. Saito has arrived, and, you know, he has no reason to expect Louise would be unhappy, but, we know she should be. So I guess the question is, what form is this outburst gonna take, I mean, already she seems to be affected, although it could be that, it might be just a result of the drink. It seemed to me that Guiche and Montmorency were drinking champagne, them being French and all that. It makes sense, but the question is whether this is truly the effect of the drink or of the potion. And I suspect it's kind of a mix of both here. I mean, immediately, Louisa's sort of crumbled. Her disapproving facade has fallen away, and now she's just blankly upset. It's like, why are you spending time with other people? Why won't you spend time with me? I love you a lot. It's very cruel. And, I feel like Saito's facial expression really says it all. It's like, whoa, boy. This is uncharted territory, so devoid from everything I've known thus far that I have no idea what to do. And, it makes sense to have a woman who would otherwise just lash you be so upset that you're not spending time with her that she bursts into tears. That's quite a change of pace, So meanwhile, Kirsch and Tabitha, they're just having a nice quiet meal for one another, but it seems as though Tabitha has something that needs doing. And rather than leave Tabitha to her business, Kirsch has decided she's gonna stick her nose in. For better or for worse, she's gonna help out regardless of the danger. It is interesting that despite that, she is seemingly having second thoughts here that, it is kind of a big deal. It is dangerous, but nevertheless, she does have to help her friend. Especially when, even in her sleep, she's having what seems to be a horrible nightmare. So that's something, at least. Kirsch is able to help her friend when she needs it the most. Alright, well that's it for this episode. If you've enjoyed it, then by all means, tune in for the next one. See you, Space Cowboy.